Greetings, vinyl community. It is Thanksgiving Day as I record this, and I am indeed here to give thanks because I have received some wonderful VCLT from some wonderful folks, and I want to start off by showing a record that was sent to me by Scott Guerin. Scott doesn't do VC videos himself, but he's a regular commenter and always has some interesting things to say. He's the singer from the punk band The Deadbeats, and he sent me this album that is a tribute to the filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard, Godard Ça vous chante. This is a real interesting combination of things because it goes all the way from the opening piece, which is a trio sonata by Vivaldi, performed perfectly straight by the string players and harpsichord, to some real noise rock from Arto Lindsay. There's some interesting, very French music on here. There's some kind of murmuring voices that remind me of the kind of things that Robert Ashley did with the indistinct voices that just form an ambient texture, atmosphere. And the real highlight, I think, is a lengthy piece, almost 19 minutes, by John Zorn, titled Godard, which is a constantly changing collage of different textures and soundscapes. And the label of the record features a yawning Siamese cat, so how can you do better than that? And another person who sent me some VCLT was also not a video maker, but a regular commenter, Rocky O. Rocky O is his name on YouTube. It's his name on his own record. Rocky O, Futility's Last Request. And you'll notice there are an awful lot of titles on there. It's actually pretty much a single continuous piece. It's poetry. It's like beat poetry. There's a little bit of singing, there's a brief harmonica solo, but it's basically Rocky O reciting his piece, and all these flow together. It's a bit of a Allen Ginsberg meets Tom Waits vibe is how I characterized it. Very New York City observational. And the voice is backed up by just kind of ambient street sounds. It sounds like it was recorded in a bus station or a shopping center. You just can tell that there are people milling about, but it's just forming a haze of indistinct human noises, and you kind of get that foggy, indistinct feel from the packaging. So that was very cool of Rocky to supply this. This is from 2018 on the Coffee Stained Records label. And one more piece of VCLT that just arrived yesterday from the wonderful Lise, whose channel is LE. Such a delightful lady. Always enjoy anything that Lise comes up with. And she came up with 3 records that she sent to me. This one I know nothing about. The artist is Heiko Meile from the band Camouflage. And the music is, he's born in Australia, but a German artist. And the music has kind of a krautrock, beat-oriented, late 70s, early 80s new wave orientation. So this one and the next one both have elements that remind me a bit of the wonderful stuff that David Byrne did for the Catherine Wheel album. You almost expect Eno to be involved. This one I wasn't sure I was going to like right from the beginning because the first couple of pieces are a bit too 4/4 oriented, a bit too simplistic in their beat. But he goes some more interesting places as the album progresses. It's all based on rhythmic loops with electronic synthesizer pieces going on above them, and On the inner sleeve, we actually see his diagram for a synthesizer patch. The next record was very similar in nature. Martin Rev from the band Suicide. This is an album, it says originally released 1991. This is a 2019 reissue on the Bureau B label, which is also the label of the Heiko Miley album. Cheyenne by Martin Rev, and as the cover suggests, even though this is electronica, there's a kind of Western theme to it. And in fact, you can tell by the titles, Dakota, Cheyenne, Buckeye, Little Rock, Prairie Star, Mustang, Pony, Durango, Coyote. Pony is actually an electronic version of Bury Me Not on the Lone Prairie, which is quite funny. And there's Martin Rev saying, "No, I assure you I am not Lou Reed." And finally, from Lise. Thank you so much, Lise. Thank you, Rocky. Thank you, Scott. Soft Machine. This is a gray area release on the Secret Records label titled Wonderland. And it's all very early Soft Machine. A lot of it is from the period when David Allen, the Australian alien, was still a member of the band before he got kicked out by immigration and was refused re-entry into Britain. The first track is titled I'm So Low. That is actually better known as Shooting at the Moon by Kevin Ayers, also been released under the title Jet Propelled Photograph. So I don't know why they didn't have the right title for that one, though they do show it as a Kevin Ayers composition. The sound quality on this really varies. Some of it is quite horrible, but it's really an interesting little compilation of that early period of Soft Machine, and the cover photo is great. It's just, enjoyable for the cover photo alone. So that was the VCLT I've received in the past week. Thank you so much, folks. I'm so grateful that you thought enough to send those really interesting albums. I'll go through some vinyl finds. I've got an awful lot, so I'm going to go really quickly through these albums that everyone knows. This was in the 49-cent bin. How could you pass up? Bob Dylan, Nashville Skyline, original 2i Columbia pressing. Cover's in really nice shape. The vinyl's a little battle-scarred, but this is a short album, and they cut those grooves deep, so you do not hear any of those little surface scratches. This sounds great. Also from a bargain bin, Pete Townsend, Empty Glass, his second solo album from 1980, I think. Yes, 1980. Moody Blues, On the Threshold of a Dream. That one was from the same bin as the Pete Townsend, so they were 2 for $3, I think. No, it's $3 each, 2 for $5. Moody Blues, On the Threshold of a Dream with the booklet. This one was not in a bargain bin, but it was very, very cool to find this. I wanted to get an original of the second Cream album, Disraeli Gears. So this replaces my my reissue copy. This is on the gold and purple Atco label. US copy, of course, which is a bit different in terms of having this little block with the song titles and this banner across the top. But a beautiful, beautiful condition copy for an original. Pink Floyd's second album, again, an original, a Tower label copy with the orange Tower label to replace my reissue copies. In this case, the disc is a bit battle-scarred, like the Dylan, maybe a bit worse for that. But the cover's in great shape, so it's hard to find an original of this that isn't pretty worn. It tends to attract a lot of ringwear. Also from Pink Floyd, Animals, from that same bargain bin as the Townsend and the Moody Blues. I did not have this on vinyl. Of course, I'd had it back in the day, but now I've got it again. The Rascals, Peaceful World, from 1971. This is a really interesting album, double LP, on the Columbia label. They'd moved to Columbia and lost half of the members. Eddie Brigatti and Gene Cornish had left the band, so they were reduced to just Felix Cavalieri on organ and keyboards and Dino Donnelly on drums. So they're assisted on here by, a lot of it is Buzzy Fighton on guitar, and Ralph McDonald plays various percussion, a lot of talking drum and congas and things like that throughout. But otherwise, they're mostly assisted by jazz musicians, some of whom, like Herbert Laws on flute and Ron Carter on bass, had actually been contributing to Rascals' album for quite some time. But this time they're joined by the likes of Pepper Adams, Joe Farrell, Alice Coltrane, just a real wealth of talent. So this is a very jazzy-oriented album in places, particularly the title track, which takes up all of side 4 and is basically a 2-chord vamp that is a sidelong, mellow jazz jam, and it's gorgeous, just wonderful. The rest of it is a bit more funk-based. There's still some of that Rascals R&B influence, but taken to a more jazzy place. Alice Coltrane plays harp on here, on the track Little Dove, which is Alice Coltrane on harp, Hubert Laws on flute, and Ron Carter on bass. So that gives you an impression of the firepower they have on this album. An album by the Italian prog group Chocolate Kings. This is their first album with the new vocalist Bernardo Lanzetti. This is from 1976. This is on the Asylum label. It's got the Manticore label logo as well. US cover, which is non-gatefold. There was a European version with this cover that was a gatefold, and the original Italian cover had kind of a really quite ugly photo of a fat Marilyn Monroe. It's supposed to be kind of a shot at America. I think they were simultaneously trying to break through in America and also scold America at the same time for having been warmongers. They're a bit put out still about World War II, it seems. But the song Chocolate Kings is about, I think, American hypocrisy coming to make peace in Italy, coming to bring freedom to Italy while having an economy built on a war machine, I think is their message there. So that's what they have to say to us. Traffic, Last Exit. This was intended to be the last Traffic album from 1969 when Steve Winwood went off to join Blind Faith. Of course, that didn't last, and Traffic got back together afterwards and gave us the likes of John Barleycorn and Shootout at the Fantasy Factory and Low Spark of High-Heeled Boys. But in the meantime, they gave us this half studio, half live effort. And that Shootout at the Fantasy Factory period also led to this album, On the Road. This is a US copy, which is the single disc version. In Europe, it was a double LP. In America, they cut it down to a single disc. Interesting tactic that meant that they left off the entire first side of what was released in Europe and included just 4 lengthy tracks: Low Spark of High-Heeled Boys, Shootout at the Fantasy Factory, so the title tracks from their previous 2 studio albums, plus 1 other track from each of those albums, Sometimes I Feel So Uninspired, 10 minutes worth, and Light Up or Leave Me Alone, again, 10 minutes worth. So very jammed out Great playing on this album. More live stuff from Todd Rundgren, another live with the band Utopia from recorded live August 1975, and including Todd's take on the West Side Story song Something's Coming, as well as responding to The Move, having covered one of the songs from Todd's old band, The Nazz, Open My Eyes, covers Do Ya from The Move. And this also includes some great prog rock pieces, Mr. Triscuit's, The Seven Rays, The Wheel. Okay, one battery change later. We'll go from the album Another Live by Todd Rundgren to Another Live album by Todd Rundgren. This one is Back to the Bars, double LP from 1978, and I particularly appreciate that this one includes a lot of material from a particular favorite album of mine, Initiation. It's got the title track, it's got the terrific Eastern Intrigue, and it's got Real Man, as well as a very cool sampling of material from throughout Todd's career to that point. Manfred Mann, Chapter 3. This is the short-lived band that came in between the 60s Manfred Mann pop group and the 70s Manfred Mann's Earth Band. This was a move towards a jazz and funk sound with a lot of horns added. And the previous pop group lineup's drummer, Mike Hug, moved up to the lead vocal slot. So they have Craig Collins replacing Mike Hug on drums. Mike Hug becomes the pianist and singer. Manfred Mann is on organ. Bernie Living on saxophone and flute. Steve York on bass. And they have various brass players augmenting them, including Nick Evans on trombone, Chris Pine, Harold Beckett. A lot of people from the British free jazz scene on there among the horn players. This includes the song Mister You're a Better Man Than I, which was done by the Yardbirds, which was written by Mike Hug along with his brother. All original material here by Mann and Hug. So, quite interesting, experimental. There's a strong funk element, a strong avant-garde free jazz element as well. So this is a really interesting direction, more progressive, I think, than the kind of overtly prog rock material that was done by the Earth Band later, which was a more polished sound without that avant jazz influence. Onto the blues, Mississippi Fred McDowell. This is just terrific. Stinging slide guitar playing from Mississippi Fred McDowell. He does do a bit of speaking, telling his story on this, and that's all transcribed on the back cover. This is on the Capitol label, and the title of this album is just classic. I Do Not Play No Rock and Roll. And it's true, it's pure blues. This is not pure blues. Josh White. The first track is a great blues song, Outskirts of Town. Josh White live at Town Hall in 1961. So this is, kind of the folk music scare period. And this is, apart from that first track, which is firmly in the blues camp, more in the folk tradition. There is even some Woody Guthrie material on here. He performs Pastors of Plenty, brings his family in, performing with him. So he's got Josh White Jr. doing some lead vocals. He's got Beverly White doing some vocals. His version, she does House of the Rising Sun on here. And this is on the Mercury label. More folky stuff, Donovan, from his double LP, Gift from a Flower to a Garden, which was split up in the USA into two separate albums. So the better known would be the Where Your Love Like Heaven album with the wonderful, wonderful psychedelic title hit. And this half, For Little Ones, was meant to be more children's music. And it's a more folk, more acoustic, not so psychedelic. And to me, it's actually a more mature album than the more poppy other half. I think this is actually, on the whole, a much better album. It's really great stuff that's in the serious British folk tradition. So classic 60s work from Donovan. No big hits on here. But just lovely, mesmerizing songs. Not really, although it's titled For Little Ones, some of the lyric content is a little mature. That's Donovan's world. Again, in the British folk vein or wheelhouse or tradition, Pentangle, their second album, Sweet Child, double album, half live, half studio. They do a couple of Mingus songs, so the jazz element that's always been part of Pentangle's foundation is definitely right out front in those pieces. There's a tribute to Moondog in the studio half. There's some actual British traditional pieces, Sauvé and So Early in the Spring. There's a lot of work in odd meters on here. I should have taken this out of the sleeve because I have to show off the great inner spread. Little photos and quotes from the individual band member. Terrific shot of Jackie McShee there. I love John Renbourd's career goal here. I started off trying to play like Big Bill Broonzy, and I'm still trying. And moving across the water to here's some Irish folk traditions. First album by Planxty from 1973 on Polydor. Christy Moore, Andy Irvine, Donald Lunny, and Liam O'Flynn make up Planxty. A lot of really classic, well-known Irish pieces like Raggle Taggle Gypsy and Arthur McBride on here. The Blacksmith, a piece familiar from Fairport Convention, not Fairport, Steel Eye Span, who did it a couple of times. And even more traditional, The Chieftains, their first album from 1964, originally released in 1964. This is the 1976 reissue on Island. This is an American pressing. That Planxty was actually an Irish pressing. This is the US version that came out in the wake of The Chieftains' success after they were used for the soundtrack for Stanley Kubrick's film of Barry Lyndon. Moving on to the classical world, André Jolivet, Concerto for Ondes Martineau and Orchestra. The Ondes Martineau is an early electronic instrument, a bit related to the theremin, but with a keyboard. So this is an interesting combination of that electronic sound world with the traditional orchestral texture. The other side of this album is a concerto for harp and chamber orchestra with the great harpist Lily Laskin. The Ondes Martineau is played by Ginette Martineau, so certainly a touch of authenticity there. Again, in the electronics and orchestra field, the composer Roberto Gerhardt collages Symphony No. 3 for electronic tape and orchestra. This has the electronic tape a bit more free. The Ondes Martineau piece by Jolivet is limited by the instrument having its own particular timbre. The electronic tape on this is able to go a bit more wild. So this has a more, I don't want to say more expressive, because I don't want to make it sound like the Jolivet was not expressive, but more flexible sound world for Gerhardt to play with in combination with the orchestral sounds. And another British avant-garde composer on the other side, Peter Maxwell Davies' Revelation and Fall, which is based on poetry by Georg Trakl, which is very unhappy. Georg Trakl was not a happy bunny. I take a sample of this. And a drop of blood fell glistening into the lonely glass of wine, and when I drank it tasted more bitter than opium, and a dark cloud hung about my head, the crystalline tears of fallen angels, and the blood ran softly from the silver wound of the sister and rained on me like fire. So that's not A Day at the Beach from Peter Maxwell Davies. 2 albums by the American composer George Crumb, Macrocosmos Volume 1, piano music based on the Zodiac. The piano is amplified and performed upon in unorthodox ways to create, unusual sound events. And you can see by the way the music is actually written in unconventional forms. It's got that spiral, is actually the kind of thing that Crumb would do in his scores, forcing the instrumentalist to take a weird perspective on reading the music off of paper and translating that into finger movements. Also by Crumb, Ancient Voices of Children. This is a vocal piece. The mezzo-soprano soloist really dominates this. It's poetry by Federico Garcia Lorca, and it's one of numerous pieces where Crumb has drawn on Lorca's poetry for inspiration and for song texts. There are instruments on here. There's oboe, mandolin, harp, electric piano, and percussion. They do some interludes, but mostly it's dominated by the 2 voices, the mezzo-soprano, who is also joined by a boy soprano in places. Then music for just percussion. 3 composers, performed by Gert Mortensen. The first side is taken up by the Norwegian composer Per Norjard and his I Ching suite. Very colorful, really keeps your attention for a piece for percussion only. It just has a kaleidoscopic amount of sound colors and great differences in texture, mood, tempo, really a lot of variety, and some interesting inspiration taken from the I Ching. On the second side, we get Xenakis and his Psapha, inspired by the poetry of Sappho. More, I don't want to say plain, but more what you might expect if you're saying you're going to hear a piece for percussion only. It's got a little bit less of that huge variety of color. It's more concerned with the textures of sound events, not so much the timbres constantly changing and providing those moods. It's more the relationship of different rhythmic events and tempos, and that goes even more so for the Elliott Carter piece, which is 4 pieces for timpani, which I spelled funny there. He wrote a number of pieces for timpani alone and requested that they not be performed all at once. So I have another record which I think overlaps with this one, but is only 4 of the pieces, and this is only 4 of the pieces. Recitatif, Canto, Saeta, and March. And obviously he's very limited in the colors that can be produced by just sets of timpani. So there's a lot of Carter's concern with how different mathematical relationships between tempos and rhythmic patterns can be modulated from one to another. He, throughout his music, is very concerned with that kind of how can rhythm or meter be treated the same way that harmony modulates in traditional classical music, or melody is varied in traditional classical music. Moving on to the world of jazz, this fills a huge hole in my collection. Last Date by Eric Dolphy, recorded in Hilversum, Holland, June 2nd, 1964, when a certain young boy version of myself was celebrating his 8th birthday. Dolphy is joined by Misha Mengelberg on piano, Jacques Scholz on bass, and Han Benink on drums. This is not actually, despite the title, his very last performance, but it's one of the very last recordings, or certainly one of his very last performances, because he did pass away later that month. But this is notable for an epic 11-minute version of You Don't Know What Love Is, performed with Dolphy on flute. And it's also notable for the famous little vocal tag where we hear Dolphy speak at the end of the album. When you hear music after it's over, it's gone in the air. You can never capture it again. Brand new album by the Chicago AACM musician Roscoe Mitchell, a great, towering figure in the American new music scene. Dots works for percussion and woodwinds, and there's a lot of percussion on here. Roscoe Mitchell playing the percussion and woodwinds, also providing the cover artwork. This is really nice. It's a lot of short pieces. There's one piece that's 5 minutes. Otherwise, most of them are in the 3-minute range. And each one has its own little sound world. He creates a lot of different colors. When you hear percussion, it's not like he's sitting at a drum kit. It's mostly what they would call in the Art Ensemble of Chicago small instruments. A lot of little noisemakers, little bells, a lot of triangles and that sort of thing. Another one that may not be quite what it sounds like is this Duets album by Marion Brown. Marion Brown, on the first 2 sides of this double album, is duetting with the trumpeter Leo Smith, but both of them are doubling on percussion. And that is largely drums. So generally they're taking turns. While each one is soloing on the horn, the other one moves over to percussion. The compositions on those sides are mostly by Leo Smith. The other 2 sides are given over to a live recording, a single piece by Marion Brown and Elliot Schwartz, where they're on stage with a large collection of percussion instruments and a piano on each end, and as well as Marion Brown on his horn, his alto sax. And they move from one end to the other. Elliot Schwartz also performs on the ARP 2600 synthesizer, so you get some real beep boop music going on there. Next up, by Sam Rivers, The Quest, a live recording from Milan in 1976. And if you know the album Conference of the Birds from ECM, this is the same band, but minus Anthony Braxton. So it's Sam Rivers on various horns and piano, Dave Holland on bass, and Barry Altschul on drums. It's a 4-part suite, so Sam Rivers plays a different instrument on each portion of the suite. In the first movement, which is Expectation, he plays soprano sax, and he moves to flute for the second one, which is Vision, and on the third, Judgment, he plays piano, and on Hope, it's tenor saxophone. And I love the inner spread of this album. It reminds me of an early Frank Zappa album graphically. It looks like something that would be on one of those Verve albums by the Mothers of Invention or the Center Spread of Lumpy Gravy. And what's that in the background? It's an ARP 2600 synthesizer, the same thing we heard on that last album. You don't hear it on this album, but it's very interesting that it turns up there. Some albums from the ECM label. I know nothing about Steve Eliofsson, but he's a guitarist who plays duets on this album with Colin Walcott on percussion. So Colin Walcott, of course, from Oregon, and that is a recording from 1981, and it's very much that ECM sound. With Colin Walcott involved, I knew it would be a goodie. Old and New Dreams, the group of players who had all formerly performed with Ornette Coleman, doing some Ornette Coleman compositions as well as originals by the band members. So it's Don Cherry on trumpet, Dewey Redman on tenor sax, Charlie Hayden on bass, and Ed Blackwell on drums. This is a live recording from 1981. Yes, all of these from roughly that period. Again with Charlie Hayden. Magico, Charlie Hayden on bass, Jan Garbarek on saxophones, and Egberto Gismonti on guitars and piano. Charlie Hayden's name comes first, but I think that just by the nature of a saxophone, bass, and guitar trio, the saxophone tends to be the dominant voice, and Egberto Gismonti is kind of the dominant voice. Compositionally, the album has that Brazilian title and opens with a Brazilian piece, Bailarina, 14 minutes worth, and the rest of side one is the title track composed by Gismonti. The rest of the album is Charlie Hayden's Silence, Garbarek's composition Spore, and another Gismonti composition, Pagliazzo. And this is a recording from 1979. Oh, did I show those guys? There you go. Norma Winstone, vocalist who sang in the group Azimuth, who recorded for ECM with her husband John Taylor and Kenny Wheeler on trumpet. On this album, she's joined by John Taylor on piano and Tony Coe on clarinet and tenor sax. She does a number of pieces where she's fitted lyrics to compositions by Bill Evans and other ECM artists. There's a Ralph Towner piece, there's an Egberto Gismonti piece, Café, and a Kenny Wheeler piece that I think was directly written with her to have lyrics, as well as some standards. She does High Lily, High Low, and Out of This World, and wraps it all up with Tea for Two. Very low-key, very mellow album. Quite interesting for that. Nice sound texture with the piano and clarinet lineup. Different jazz world, Stanley Turrentine Cherry on the CTI label from 1972. He's joined by Milt Jackson, who is very, very prominent. He's given kind of co-leader credit there, and that's definitely more than appropriate because he's just about as prominent on the album as Turrentine himself. Bob James is on piano, Cornell Dupree on guitar, Bill Cobham, Bill, not Billy, but Bill Cobham on drums, and Ron Carter on bass, whom we last heard from on that Rascals album. And this opens with a cover of Lee Morgan's Speedball. So that's it. And we get a little ad for the infamous toe licking album there. Sugar. Finally. Have I done enough? Have I bored you enough? From that same old bargain bin, the 49-cent bin where I found the Bob Dylan, Jimmy Smith, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Definitely not a mint copy. We get some arrangements by Oliver Nelson, so it's a big band sound behind that very ripping organ that we always get from Jimmy Smith. Slaughter on 10th Avenue, John Brown's Body, and it closes with Bluesette, another little easy listening tune, Wives and Lovers, from that era. A new program of driving jazz by the organist who won top honors in the annual Downbeat Jazz Poll. And a very silly cover. All right, that's it for now. Thank you very much. Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, Scott, Lise, Rocky, and thank you, everybody. Be well. Talk with you again soon. Bye-bye for now.